right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Cecil Chick, and I use female pronouns she, her, and hers. Thank you for joining us for our last installment of the Titan Table Talk series, brought to you by the Office of Diversity, Inclusion, and Equity Programs in partnership with Alumni Engagement and Government and External Relations. Today, our panelists will be engaging in a dialogue focused on civic engagement in Asian, Pacific Islander, and Desi American, or APIDA communities. Today's dialogue will be moderated by Dr. Natalie Tran, the Director of National Resource Center for Asian Languages, the Department Chair of Secondary Education, and the Director of EDD program here on campus. Before we get started with the program, I wanted to provide just some Zoom housekeeping information. First and foremost, I wanted to let attendees know that this is a Zoom webinar, so you are muted and you won't be able to use your camera during the session. We will have a moderator that will lead us into a dialogue with our panelists today. If you do have any questions for our panelists or wish to ask any follow-up questions for our panelists, please utilize the Q&A function located in the menu bar at the bottom of your screen. Your questions will be addressed in the last 20 to 30 minutes of the program. This dialogue will also be recorded today and posted with closed captioning on the DIEP YouTube channel for everyone to enjoy. Finally, at the end of this program, please fill out the event feedback form that will be sent to all participants using the email for registration. To kick off today's event, I would like to introduce the president of Cal State Fullerton, Fran Vergy, to provide some welcome remarks. Thank you, President Vergy, for joining us today.
Well, thank you, Cecil. It's great to be here. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Titan Table Talk, Civic Engagement in the APIDA Communities. It's one of the many events that's happening at Cal State Fullerton to honor Asian Pacific Islander Desi American Heritage Month. As always, I'm honored to be here and grateful to the Titans who make this event possible. Bobby and Cecil and Courtney and the entire DIEP team, our amazing moderator for today, Dr. Natalie Tran, and of course, our distinguished panelists. I'm excited to hear from them. They are familiar to many of us, Natalie, Ted, Yvonne, Nancy, they're familiar to us as part of our Titan community. But I also want to take a point of personal privilege. You can see I'm grinning from ear to ear to welcome Saba Ansari, who just graduated from Cal State Fullerton last year and is a grad student at the University of Michigan. I'm so proud of her and her presence and her poise and her love. They always shine through. It's so good to see her. Saba, I miss you. I'm excited to see you. As another allowance, I want to use my time today to highlight someone who models all we seek to achieve through the discussions we are about to have today. Like all of you, there are countless folks among our community who I hold near and dear to my heart as colleagues, as friends, as mentors and mentees, and of course, as the Titan family. I think of these Titans as heroes because all of them, faculty, staff, and students, they are exactly that. Heroic in what they are doing and their lifelong commitment to education and learning. Heroic in what they do for each other and our communities. And heroic in how they continually lift up others through inclusion, equity, and civic engagement, which is what we're talking about today. And as impressive as all these Titans heroes are, every now and then I meet a Titan who becomes, well, they become a personal superhero for me. Someone who in my eyes exceeds even the most heroic among us, Titans who bring spirit and light up not just our communities and state, but our nation and our world. I come to see these Titan superheroes as superheroes in that they wield their great power with great responsibility, in that they seek to use their gift not for personal gain, but for greater good, in that they understand what I call the elixir of life as centered. It's not on money or power or ego, but on honesty, love, and service. To me, there have been no better examples of this during this pandemic than my friend, my colleague, I call him my brother, and yes, he's one of my all-time personal superheroes, and that's Nguyen. And that is especially true through the lens of what this Titan Table Talk is founded upon and what we're going to be talking about. That's civic engagement. Tam is a case in point. Since Tam earned his Titan MBA in 2005, he has served as our president of the Cal State Fullerton Alumni Association, the founding president of the Vietnamese American Alumni Chapter of Cal State Fullerton. He's on our Cal State Fullerton Philanthropic Foundation and slated to be our foundation president in the coming year. He's been a visiting professor at our School of Business, an active leader in the Vietnamese Chamber of Commerce, a vice chair of the Orange County United Way Board, and is slated to be the board chair in this coming year, where I serve with him. He's a first-generation college graduate, and his life story epitomizes the American dream. From being separated from his father, a South Vietnamese naval commander during the Vietnam War, to reuniting with his family in the United States, earning his Titan degree, and creating one of the largest manicuring programs in the nation with his sister and two-time Titan alum, Lynn. But like so many other Asian families who come to this country seeking a new life, like my own family, Tam's mom and dad did not risk everything to merely transform their own lives and their family legacies. They sought to transform their new home as well, to make this country a better place by fighting for social justice in our communities, by enriching our state with multicultural traditions and perspectives, by providing immigrants with equitable access to the skills and the certifications needed to succeed as manicurists and estheticians, yes, but also as business owners, voters, community leaders, and social justice champions. In other words, civic engagement at work, at its finest. That is what Tam and his family have done since they arrived here as war refugees in the spring of 1975. That is what so many immigrants have done in this country, and that is what they continue to do. So when the pandemic hit and frontline healthcare workers had to rise and had to risk their own lives to treat patients due to a scarcity of personal protective equipment, it was no surprise to me at all to see who stood up first and tallest. My Titan superhero, Tam Nguyen, together with Lynn and with co-founder Christine Nguyen, Ha Dong and Johnny Ngo, and Ted Nguyen, who is also a panelist today and becoming a good friend, Ted. You see me without my mask, as you said during the break. Tam created Nailing It for America. In a few short months, this action-oriented organization purchased, collected, manufactured, delivered more than $30 million worth of PPE to frontline healthcare workers. On top of that, they paid for and delivered more than 70,000 restaurant meals for healthcare workers around the nation, helping healthcare workers and keeping those restaurants going. And through all this, Tam's mom was right there with them, donating money from her own retirement savings to help get PPE and meals out to the front lines, acting as the perfect epitome of what what we're talking about today. In other words, as the pandemic shut down Tam's business and caused untold financial losses, he and his family sought not to save themselves, but to save others. And as word spread of what he and his Nailing It co-founders were doing, I was so proud. And I so look forward to seeing the nation praising their efforts. I look forward to Orange County gathering around them, thanking them for their leadership and benevolence. I look forward to watching their fellow Americans hold them up as superheroes, because that is what they are. And while the gratitude has come, it's come within our Titan family, and it's come from across the country. All too often, the opposite has also been true elsewhere in our nation. As we are all painfully aware, this is not new to American history. Asians and Asian Americans have long served and supported our nation while concurrently being scapegoated, hated, discriminated against. Our APIDA communities who built this country only to be barred from citizenship within the US, like under policies like the Chinese Exclusion Act. APIDA military members who fought for this nation in the First World War, only to be forced into internment camps during the Second World War. APIDA business owners who have poured their love into America only to endure revenge-motivated attacks in the wake of 9/11. We all know our nation's shameful history, but it's important to recognize that it's far more than history. It is our present. And if we do not stand up, it will be our future. Not on some other side of the world, not somewhere else in this country, not in some other state, but right here, happening to our colleagues, our friends, and yes, even our personal superheroes. Case in point, I want to talk about a letter that was sent to Tam and other Asian salon owners around our state a few weeks ago. It called Tam and his colleagues unspeakable and hateful racial epithets. It said Tam and his colleagues don't belong here. It said they should go back to their country where COVID came from. It said that most Americans only pretend to like them, but truthfully can't stand them. It said they caused and spread the pandemic. All of this after Tam and Ted and Christine and all their colleagues led one of the largest life-saving measures in our for our frontline workers in this nation. All of that after Advanced Beauty College has graduated more than 50,000 Americans who have gone into the communities to work, pay taxes, vote, and lead. All of this after a lifetime of service and civic engagement that most of us can't even list, let alone comprehend. As many of you know, Tam took that hateful letter to every news station possible over the past few weeks so that no one could look away from this hate. No one could pretend that it doesn't exist. And no one could claim ignorance to the systemic racism that is baked into our nation. And a few weeks ago, at a Stop Asian Hate rally in Koreatown, as Tam read that letter aloud on camera, as Ted stood shoulder to shoulder with him, sharing it from CNN to local news, Julie and I were standing right behind them. And as strong as I like to think I am no Tam Nguyen. I am no superhero. And every time he read those vile words that day, I silently wept behind my sunglasses. I was trembling behind Tam's granite shoulders. My heart was breaking under my orange Titan polo. But as I watched Koreatown's streets fill up with APIDA superheroes like Tam, speaking out, marching peacefully, reading letters, demanding change, my broken heart began to mend. For in each of those APIDA communities and their allies, I saw all of you, our diverse Titan family. I saw you literally, yes, with many Titans marching shoulder to shoulder with Tam and Ted and Christine and Tam's mom that day. But I also saw you figuratively in the presence of so many who shared our Titan mission of love, equity, inclusion, and social justice. A message of healing, saving, serving, being the change we want to see in this world, and showing that we will not stop until we, as a nation, eradicate systemic racism and uphold social justice for all. That, Titan family, that is what civic engagement is. That is what these Titan Table Talks are all about. And that is what superheroes do. So thank you for being those heroes. Thank you for inviting me to be a part of this. I so look forward to hearing this panel. And I look forward even more to us all standing together to be the change we need to see on our campus, in our community, in our state, and in our country. So glad to be here.
Thank you so much, President Virgie, for your vulnerability and highlighting one of the many Titan superheroes that we have within our community. Your words will serve as a foundation and a call to action in our program today. Now, to officially begin, I want to introduce our moderator. As I mentioned earlier, Dr. Natalie Tran is currently the director of the National Resource Center for Asian Languages and currently serves as the department chair of secondary education and the director of the EDD program here on campus. She is a strong advocate for language programs and has played an integral role for the expansion of the Vietnamese dual language programs in the US. Her research interests include STEM education, dual language immersion programs, mindfulness, and diversity in higher education. Without further ado, please welcome Dr. Natalie Tran, everyone.
Thank you, Cecil, for the introduction. And I would like to thank President Virgie for your moving and caring remarks, highlighting the superheroes carrying out the important work of community building, community giving, and community healing, which is what we need at this time. And of course, no other than our favorite superhero, Tam Nguyen, who truly is an amazing leader and a wonderful friend. I'd also like to thank the Office of Diversity, Inclusion, and Equity Programs for organizing this important Titan Table Talk, along with esteemed panelists and participants who are joining our webinar today. It's an honor to serve as the moderator for today's discussion on civic engagement in Asian Pacific Islander Desi American APIDA communities. This topic is timely and critical given the alarming rise of attacks and hate crime against Asian Americans across the country and across the world, actually. In the past several weeks, we have seen inhumane acts of violence targeting Asian Americans, including the murder of 6 women in Atlanta, hate crimes toward elderly Asians that resulted in physical injuries and death. And sadly, anti-Asian racism and discrimination are not new. We have a long history of people using the model minority myth, the perpetual foreigner stereotypes, sexualized violence against Asian American women, and diseases to justify anti-Asian xenophobia and violence. In more recent events, the attacks can be seen as the result of both the pandemic, the rising of white nationalism, and sexualized violence against Asian American women. We are currently experiencing a great deal of pain as a community, both at the individual and at the collective levels. Many of us are angry, frustrated, afraid. We feel powerless. We experience despair. We are hurt, isolated, and unseen. We are afraid to take walks, to take our children to the park, to engage in daily activities that every American should be able to enjoy. In this very same moment, others have found a voice and stood up, such as our friends from Nailing It for America that President Virgie has shared earlier in his remarks. And some might go even one step further to cultivate interracial healing, collaboration among various communities, community building, community healing, and community giving, even at this time. Above all, I think there is an important lesson to be learned here. That is, we must cut through the delusion that something as superficial as the color of our skin can separate us. How can we single out ourselves as superior or inferior based on the color of our skin or any kind of distinction for that matter, while dismissing the interconnectedness, the coherence, the continuity that all of us share in our existences? So this points to a much larger problem, that this isn't just about anti-Asian violence. This isn't just about Black Lives Matters, right? This isn't just about children being separated from their families at the border. This is about watering the seeds of hate, discrimination, and violence that poison us all of us as a collective. And as the result of that, we are wounded. We need to take refuge in not only in one another, but also in the wisdom of our leaders, of our ancestors, of the elders in our communities to help us make sense of what is going on and to help us carry forward. Now more than ever, we are hungry to see Asian voices be heard, our faces be seen, our presence be humanized, and our leaders lifted up. Our Asian American community is asking itself very tough questions at this time. People want to know how we can alleviate the pain, live through the trauma, heal, and grow, both at the individual level and collectively during this extremely challenging time. Join me today are four distinguished panelists who will be sharing their insights, their personal and professional experiences to help shed light on civic engagement in APIDA communities in our current context. I would like to welcome a friend, Ted Nguyen, pronouns he, him, his. Ted is currently serving and working with the Department Manager Public Communications and Media Relations at Orange County Transportation Authority. Ted is nationally award-winning social media, public relations, and communications professional with more than 20 years of experience. In 2012, Ted led an international panel of social media experts to engage in worldwide gatherings for Arts Cultural Heritage Week in Florence, Italy. Ted's work in social media and digital communication is featured in two books, and they are The Power of Real-Time Social Media Marketing and The Big Books of Social Media. And I had the pleasure to work with Ted more recently through his work with Nailing It for America, and he is certainly a visionary and a talented individual. Also joining us is Yvonne Cuaresma, pronouns she, her, hers. Yvonne is an alumnus of Cal State Fullerton, a graduating class of 2016 and founder of the Climate Journal Project. The mission of the Climate Journal Project is to provide a space, practice, and community to help alleviate eco-anxiety through their guided reflections and challenges. They empower others to transition away from planetary grief and climate change paralysis. Yvonne started the project about a year ago, and a year later, the project has over 900 members from the UK, Africa, Brazil, and more. We are also thrilled to welcome back another Tyne alumnus, Saba Ansari, pronouns she, hers, hers, and she is class of 2019. And Saba is a former director of organizing for RISE. She is currently a first-year master's in public health student at University of Michigan. She graduated from Cal State Fullerton in 2019 with a degree in political science and chemistry. And following graduation, she worked as the director of organizing at Rice, where she managed a national grassroots organizing program, turning out over 100,000 first-time student voters in key battleground states, including Michigan, Wisconsin, Georgia, Pennsylvania. So thank you for joining us. And finally, we have Nancy Yap, pronouns she, hers, and hers. Nancy is the executive director of the Center for Asian Americans United for Self-Empowerment, CAUSE. CAUSE is a nonprofit organization that is committed to advocating the political and civic engagement of leaders in the American Pacific Islander community. Previously, she served as vice president of development at LEAP, which stands for Leadership Education for Asian Pacifics, where she provided oversight for fundraising, strategic partnerships, program development, curriculum design, and training. She also owned her own artist management business for over 10 years representing spoken word and hip hop artists, including artists from the 2003 Tony Award winning Russell Simon's Present Deaf Poetry Jam on Broadway. Nancy is also president of the Arts District, Little Tokyo Neighborhood Council, and she is a co-founder of programs in Little Tokyo that provide services to the community. Please join me in welcoming our panelists at this time. So without further ado, let's begin, shall we? I'm going to go ahead and share some of the questions with our panelists here. So the first question here is, what issues do you think have had the most impact on the APIDA communities in our society in the past decades? And how does this history inform what issues impact the APIDA communities now? Please feel free to jump in, any one of you.
Yeah, obviously, top of mind is Stop Asian Hate. And, right now you're seeing a graphic of, my work at OCTA. But before I begin, I wanted to give a special tribute to all the Titans that I've surrounded myself with in the course of the 20 years as a professional in Orange County. I've got Elia Berdusco, who's a Titan alumni, who's my community relations specialist, as well as Melina, who's our intern. And I just wanted to give a heartfelt appreciation to your president and his tearful remarks. And I also wanted to thank Julie, who was there with us on the march and our powerful display of unity. And as Dam read live on CNN that Saturday morning, it was the first time I actually heard the words in that hateful letter. And Dr. Verji edited in his remarks the curse words, the vile hatred, the pure evil that was part of that letter. So I wanted to thank Dr. Verji and Julie, because when I heard those words for the first time, I fell apart. My heart broke seeing and hearing those words live on national television. And I wanted to thank Julie for holding my hand and for comforting me, because those words pierced through my heart, as well as the hearts of every single Asian American, Pacific Islander, Desi community member, and their allies across the country and across the world. But we need to show what evil is. We need to meet where evil is and where hatred is, and block it and show our humanity, as Dr. Verji said, to fight hate with love. And that's what we are about. And there is no other deniable way as far as like a tactic or a strategy. It's just simple as shining light, truth, and love where darkness, evil, and hatred exists.
Thank you, Ted.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. I want to talk a little bit about, I think for me, in terms of issues, it has been a lack of data around our community and the diversity of our community. I say that in relation to these moments around Stop Asian Hate, where these moving incidents and stories that hurt our communities and have been very painful, not just recently or even in this past year where we've seen a lot of rise of it, but also just throughout history, how we've been treated as community members, but mostly as foreigners, as others, and as someone who very much identifies California as my home. It just hurts every time that I'm seen as not. The data is really interesting because I think there is a sentiment of not believing us, not believing that we're experiencing these things or that it's that serious. I think it also impacts the services we receive. It's why the census was so important, that we're here and that we have a lot of needs, including in some of our communities, just the rampant impact of COVID-19 on our businesses, on the Pacific Islander communities. And so for me, as much as data and disaggregating data is something we've been talking about a lot in our communities, the reason it's important is because we're often invisible. Our issues are not heard or seen or taken seriously. And so something like Stop AAPI Hate that actually tracks incidents and captures it actually gives us the data that allows us to say there were 4,000 incidents reported this past year. And we're about to actually, I know they're releasing another report that will show that March was particularly bad as well. So just really being able to tell our story and be seen.
As part of that data, that's one thing that we've been advocating for is that, community-based organizations as well as law enforcement need to be able to be equipped to be able to report Asian hate or all hate. And that's what the US Senate is tackling right now this week. I think there's a great deal of momentum behind that. There's resources behind that legislation, not only in strictly advocating and requiring and legislatively requiring that documentation of hate, but also providing the necessary training and resources for both law enforcement agencies and the folks on the front line that are fighting hate, whether it's LGBTQ hate, whether it's Black Lives hate, whether it's Asian American hate or Latinx hate. It absolutely is critical that we reach out today to our senators and our congresspeople today, not tomorrow, but today. So I call upon all the students that are listening right now. You folks are all voters. So it's incumbent upon you to call your congresspeople and your senators and let them know that you support that legislation. It can't come soon enough, because when I've adopted this mantra and I told my staff and other people this, if you can't see it, you can't be it. So we're here to represent the Asian American community as leaders, and as visible leaders, but we can't be it if you can't see it. So we need to be visible, and part of that visibility is being present and reporting the infringement of our human rights, our civil rights, and our rights for protection. So it's critically important to call your legislator today.
Thank you, Nancy, and thank you, Ted.
Yeah, and if I may chime in, Yvonne Cuaresma here. I think in a lot of the work that we do, I'm specifically in the environmental and social impact field. And so I think that what the biggest question that I receive is, how is everything connected? And I think that I'm here to remind everyone that everything that we do is very much connected to our identity. How we treat somebody else that isn't of our race is very much connected to your work and how you show up for other people. What you consume on social media is very much connected to how you will act today and tomorrow. What Ted is saying, it's very important to, yes, collect this data, continue to be educated, but it's also very predictive of what your next steps are as well. And so I think the biggest, I guess, issue that I would say, not only in Asian hate, but in just otherness, in this mindset of otherness, is that remembering that everything we say and do needs to come from a mindful place. It needs to be intentional. It needs, although we are one person that belongs in one community, whatever we do as a community of Titans will also affect all the other CSU campuses. Similar to what we do in the Asian American community will also affect the future of other ethnicities, other communities that will probably deal with the same thing that we are currently dealing with now. And so I guess my message is, whatever is happening now, remember that. Remember this feeling. And use your voice to advocate for another community, because everything again is related. Use this voice, use these feelings that you're currently feeling, and advocate for whatever social justice movement, environmental, whatever that may look like for you. What's relevant to you right now will be very relevant to me, even though many of us here identify as Asian American. My background as a Filipino American who grew up in Saudi Arabia is very different from someone that grew up in Southern California their entire life. So, so I guess to summarize is one, everything that we do now has some sort of effect in the future. And so be careful with what that is, be careful with what decision you make. And number two, use your voice not only to advocate for your own community, but what's fair, and extend those privileges, extend that power and that voice into other communities as well.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you shared that, because it's part of the Nailing It for America effort. When Black Lives Matter, with that horrible tragedy, it's not just a tragedy, it was just a crime, right? It was just so horrific. We were the first to rally behind our Black brothers and sisters and saying that Black Lives Matter, because we understand what impacts one group impacts other groups. And so we're all in it together, literally, and there's a sectionality, an intersectionality of everything. We have, Black Asian Americans, we have colleagues, we have friends, we have coworkers, we're all interconnected. And so that's why when the Stop Asian Hate became such a big issue, one of our first advocates was Bobby McDonald, a friend of yours at Cal State Fullerton, and the president of the OC Chamber of Commerce, the Black Chamber of Commerce, stood by our side to offer his support as an African-American, as a fellow American, and as an advocate for Asians and Latinx and other communities. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Yvonne, and thank you, Ted, for the follow-up. I just got a message from Saba that her internet is cutting out, so perhaps we can reconnect with her when she's able to join us. I'm going to go ahead and move us into the next question. So, and you might have shared some of this already, but perhaps if there's anything that you would add to this. Based on your personal and professional experiences, how have you linked civic engagement to the advocacy work that you do?
I think for me, it's been fairly simple. At my work now, switching hats, with the Orange County Transportation Authority, it just makes sense, from our perspective, in that, Orange County is not a changing county in demographics; it's a changed county. It's vastly different than what it was 30 years ago, 40 years ago, even 10 years ago. And what you see behind me is that demographic change that's taken place with a huge number of our Latinx community members. The fastest growing population is Asian American in not only Orange County, but across the country. The largest subgroup of Asian Americans is Vietnamese Americans that have chosen beautiful Orange County as their home. And it's a home that they built their lives upon after fleeing war-torn Vietnam, as Dr. Phram has eloquently spoken from the heart and shared the tribute of Nguyen and his family and his mother and the efforts that have taken place. So for us, it's been really about communicating and engaging with the public. And who are the public? They're increasingly brown, Black, and white. And they're also speaking a different language. We're seeing from our demographic information that the close to 50% of Orange County family members speak a language other than English within their home. So we need to be where people are. We need to speak the language and the culture of the people that we serve. So it's so critically important. And we were actually one of the first organizations to team up with Cal State Fullerton, with Dr. Inez, with the formerly of the Latino Communications Institute, and providing such a critical, valuable information when COVID broke and it was impacting people of color, especially Latinos and Latinx community. So we teamed up with Northgate Market and Congressman Lou Correa and the head nurse at Cal State Fullerton to provide live Facebook in language, in Spanish, providing critical information to our Latin community, our Spanish-speaking community, all with the magic of Facebook Live in language, no translation required. And we're doing that in Vietnamese, we're doing that in a multitude of different ways, but civic engagement is beyond just what we do in the confines of our work. It's also about extending our hearts and our minds outside of those traditional boundaries at work, of being human and reaching out to those communities that are in need so that we provide them with the love, the understanding, the support that they need to be able to fulfill their human destination and their destiny so that we can move them to the people that they aspire to, the families that they aspire to. So as all Americans, we're very aspirational people. So we aspire greatness, not only among ourselves and our families, but to others. And that's why I love these Titan Talks, because it gives me motivation and the hard work that's ahead, that I can do it with the friends that I have at Cal State Fulton, the alumni, as well as the extended adopted family members, such as myself, as a Titan, as a true Titan of the community.
Thank you, Ted.
Yeah, thank you, Ted. As you're speaking, it's taking me back to when I was a college student at Cal State Fullerton. If you guys don't know, I was actually an intern at OCTA, and I worked very closely with Ted, and it has come full circle now that we're in the same virtual room. I think my perspective is fairly it brings a different background. So I'm the founder of the Climate Journal Project. We focus primarily on mental health and environmental issues and how that affects, and actually it has affected many young people in terms of environmental grief and anxiety about climate change. But beyond that, I think that climate change affects a lot of people, a lot of folks in the world that don't have clean water. They live day to day with air pollution. They live day to day with plastic pollution. And I didn't really put two and two together. I didn't really put my identity as a Filipino American, and I didn't really connect that with my passion for environmentalism until I finished my grad program at NYU in food studies, and the pandemic hit, and I was really severely depressed that I had to leave New York City. And unfortunately, when I was leaving New York City, it was because there was no point in paying for an apartment there. I needed to be close to my family here, and I started to doubt my path, my career path. Why did I dedicate 3 years of my life to social and environmental work if funding was going to be removed from it, if all these external factors wasn't going to support it? Eventually, I learned that, year after year, every time I would visit the Philippines, I saw that I could have easily been me that had to live in plastic polluted communities. It could have easily been me to have asthma and all of these health conditions due to the air pollution. And that's why today, even though I'm living in California and I've had all of these beautiful experiences to travel the world, I still feel so much fire to fight with, to fight for environmental justice and all of that. And so what I've done now is I've created a community to help folks just continue to build that relationship, because at the end of the day, social and environmental impact is only as strong as we are, right? Like if we as leaders fall and falter, that's okay. Let's create space for that. But how do we get up the next day, and how do we continue to strengthen our community with solutions? And so sometimes it starts here, it starts within. In order for these movements to continue being sustainable moving forward, we have to really strengthen our gratitude for each other and the one planet that we've been given. Because if we don't have that, then the feelings of overwhelming feelings, the stress, the anxiety will catch up to us. And unfortunately, it won't allow us to be productive in the work that we're doing. And so I would say that to remember, and I guess for me, the question was, how have I inserted, my identity in my work? It's really staying true to who I am, and understanding and being vulnerable enough to say, you know what, I am not always happy and cheery. Sometimes I am sad and depressed about XYZ, and it's because I care so much about my brothers and sisters who don't have the same privileges or don't have the same opportunities that I have. And that's, you know, many of you might resonate. That's something that I've dealt with my whole life. I know that I've been given a beautiful life here in California, but that not many others have in other countries. And so that's just something that's mentally I've been dealing with as an Asian American, and I feel very passionate to continue working on.
Thank you, Yvonne.
I just wanted to also add, when you talk about like being depressed and anxious, I think that's something that as millennials we feel very strongly with, and with everything that's been going on within the past year, it's been really difficult to wake up every day and say, I'm going to keep doing this work. I'm going to keep showing up for my community. And I think early on at Cal State Fullerton, I realized the importance of advocacy and civic engagement. And to me, they go hand in hand. I was involved with student government and getting out the student vote. And I took that to my position at RISE, where I was directing a national organizing program. And to me, I feel like in order to inform others and address issues of public concern, part of that work is advocating for what you believe in, showing up for it, showing up for your community, and letting people know that there is so much value in advocacy, even if it's something incredibly small that you're advocating for, or an incredibly small way of you showing up. It's important, like whether it be liking a tweet or retweeting something, or telling someone else in your community that you stand with them, you're listening to them. I think that's really important. And to me, civic engagement, advocacy, they don't exist without each other. And I think something we need to work on moving forward is figuring out how we can continue to be advocates in all the ways possible.
Thank
I
you,
think that,
Saba.
yeah, and I think, Saba, you bring up a good point about the tie-in between civic engagement and advocacy, but that also, it then goes beyond the vote. I mean, I think all of us here speaking today have ways that we think about our communities, the issues that we're passionate about beyond the vote. And I think that's another thing I feel is really important that we tie in, is that the vote educates us and is a first start, right? And then once we know what we think about certain issues, we know what we'd like to see. It's a great place to begin then thinking about, so what can you do? What organizations can you be part of? What next steps can you take? And one thing I wanted to say about my personal experience, and one of the reasons I'm actually here at Cause, is that before I joined Cause, I was on the Arts District Little Tokyo Neighborhood Council. I had joined because we're having conversations around boundary, and I'm a history major, and I believe that these iconic historical places where our community was picked up for internment camps should be in the boundaries of Little Tokyo, but it's a very hyper-local civic engagement moment. What I didn't realize is when the pandemic hit, I would also have the relationships in the neighborhood to start a meals program quickly. But also because of my public service, I understood the access that we had to emergency funding to be able to get the program off the ground. We need people in our communities who care about our communities serving on these local civic boards, because there is access there, not just to funds, but to understanding how government works, how we can navigate it, and that quite honestly, our community isn't at all of these tables yet. And we're so diverse that it shouldn't be like one and done, right? And so how can we all be there, make sure our voices are heard and that our concerns are heard? And I think for me, Yvonne talking about bringing her personal experience to her climate environmental work, I think a lot about how we talk about Pacific Islander communities and the impact that climate change has on home and what it means to slowly lose home, right? And I think climate change does impact our communities and is a huge part of how we should think more holistically about what our communities need.
Yeah, and I'm so glad that you brought up that we need to be at the table. We can't be at the table unless we demand a seat at the table. And I think one of the things, that our experience has taught us is that we can't be quote unquote the stereotypical Asian as our parents have taught us, that we need to speak up when things have gone awry. We need to shout out our accomplishments, our colleagues' accomplishments, because we're taught to be humble. And we need to be able to advocate for our own interests. And one of the great things that I wanted to share with all of you folks, and this is I'm showing the CNN broadcast right now, But another late breaking news has happened at the Orange County Transportation Authority. It's a really powerful, influential board that controls more than $1.2 billion of transportation funding in Orange County. And our very own Nguyen was just appointed to be a member of that powerful board. So that's a source of pride for all of us of Asian descent, of people of color, of diversity, that we have another strong, powerful, and authentic advocate for us at the seat of a powerful, influential board that's made up of all the board of supervisors, the mayors and other city members are part of that board as well. He's got an equal powerful role on that 18-member board.
Ted, thank you for sharing that, because I think, and just to add one more point, I think that something that I love to do is create room for celebrating. Today we're covering a lot of hard topics and challenging topics to talk about, but also part of the movement is celebrating all of our wins and applauding our community members for accomplishing such great things. And so that's a huge win, and that's very it's made my day. So thank you for sharing that and allowing us to celebrate that. And I think that's important.
Thank you, Ted, for sharing the great news. And I can't think of anyone who's better than Tam to serve in that role, because I know that he will represent our community very well, and certainly addressing some of the needs that we see in our community. Nancy, I appreciated your comment about finding the link between advocacy, right, and showing up and standing up, right, to our community. Which is really a great transition into this area. That the next area that I would like for us to discuss is looking at the political systems, right? In order for us to make some movement, move the needles, make some changes, we need to look at the different structures, the various systems that impact the work that we do. So this is a question for all of our panelists. What do you wish our political systems knew about the APIDA communities and civic engagement?
I would say a start is talking to us. What we saw in the November elections is that our communities actually reached out to the least, even though we really showed up in terms of numbers. And I think that part of reaching out to us is also language access. It is important to recognize that we're diverse. Covering 2 or 3 languages doesn't really cut it. And yet all of us have the right to be part of this process. And so I think from like a overall political systems, it's really important that we advocate for language access for our communities, but that also there are strategies to reach our communities by these campaigns from these political systems, and that we are a powerful force also, but also as part of the narrative of our country, that we have every right to participate. And so for me, I think oftentimes our communities are meant to like translate for ourselves what this might mean for our communities versus actually having an opportunity to engage with the people who have the platforms and who can talk very informedly about our community and how things impact us. So I just think that that's an important thing. To be able to know that we're here and that we should be spoken to.
Thank you, Nancy.
Yeah,
I just wanted to. Go ahead, Ted.
Saba, go ahead.
No, it's okay. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I totally agree, Nancy. Not only like listening, but meeting us where we're at. I think what we've seen, at least me personally, like being in different states over the last year, that the model minority myth is harmful, and the APIDA community isn't a monolith, and we're all incredibly unique. Asian, Pacific Islander, Desi American, like that includes a lot of different identities. And I think throughout the presidential campaign in the past year, there's a targeted approach of how they think we should be attracted and how we should be talked to, but they're not doing the work of listening and meeting us where we're at. So I think that's something that's really important that we need to keep in mind, not only at the presidential level, but all the way down to, local communities and locally elected officials as well.
Just really quickly, being in transportation and working with so many different elected officials and so many different government agencies, we're at a place now where we are able to provide information in language. I think it's so critically important that we continue to be visible, not only with the Asian American community, but then also with the Latinx community, LGBTQ community. These are our constituencies, and it's so critically important. And I have this slide up here as far as the metrics, right? Measuring what matters. What matters are the people behind the numbers. And I think it's so instructive if we can communicate in a powerful way what our numbers represent, right? They represent votes. And elected officials are all about +1, +1, +1, right? They're always looking for that +1. We are that +1. So frame things in terms of metrics, frame things in terms of stats and facts. That's what's going to move people. Obviously our stories are important, but what's more important, I think, is the story coupled with the measurements that's going to engage us and endear ourselves to elected officials, because when we matter, they matter. When they matter, they support us, and we all matter together. So it's mutually exclusive, and that we're all in it together, and we can help them, they can help us, and we can all help each other make Orange County a better place for all of us.
I love that.
Thank you,
I think,
Yvonne, go ahead.
yeah, to go off of that, I think also consistency is key. I think that it's one thing to collect stats 10 today and then not do it again 10 years until 10 years from now, because I think that our identities are it impacts us differently, and it's very different for each generation, right? So my parents as Filipino Americans, and like their experience and their needs are very different from mine or my sisters and my siblings and my colleagues, and so I think that to engage, yes, in communicating with us and collecting all of this data and being engaged with the community as much as possible, but then also being consistent about it moving forward. I think that that's certainly key in preserving efficient movements and just staying relevant to the needs of our communities.
Thank you, Yvonne. And so thinking about our community members, right, and in the current context, some might be afraid, some might want to do something, they're not sure. What are some of the next steps? How to get involved? How do they stay engaged in this conversation? How they can serve as allies, right? How they can seek out for resources? How they can be better informed? What do you wish more members of the APIDA communities would know about civic engagement and how to get involved?
I would just say that I think we make it sound a lot more complicated than it is when we're thinking about civic engagement and advocacy. It's really as simple as talking to your neighbor about, stop API hate. Like, what does that mean to your neighbor? What does that mean to the people who live on your street? Starting out small and having one-on-one conversations with people you're interacting with regularly is, to me, I think one of the most important ways to engage with people civically. I think we think about elections, and similar to what Nancy said earlier, as the only way, maybe the first way. But to me, I think having conversations with people you interact with, doing the small legwork of figuring out what other organizations believe in the same things as you. And it's as simple as maybe, the first step of your advocacy this week is subscribing to an email newsletter, to being up to date of what new legislation is in the House, or following someone on Twitter who's a vocal advocate. I think we use these big words and make it sound really difficult when it's as simple as just having a conversation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it's having the right conversations. It's great to, I love that, having that one-on-one conversation with your neighbor, but to magnify it, to amplify it, you really need to be able to, create a coalition or to join an existing coalition to be able to, have a voice, to have that collective voice. But, as a media, public relations professional, marketing professional, it's also really utilizing the power of the media, whether it's traditional media like CNN, whether it's local, newspapers, community news. This is so critically important today. But we all have the power of the media in our fingertips via our phones, right? And via posting on social media, posting, resharing, retweeting, and being able to provide that critical mass of information so that change can happen. I'm a firm believer if a tree falls in the forest and nobody hears it, it doesn't really fall. I mean, physically it does fall, but nobody hears it. So we as Asian Americans, as well as people of color, people of good conscience and goodwill, need to be able to break those barriers, chop down those trees, and make sure that the whole world hears about that huge thump. It's the thump that we need, it's a bump that we need to move us forward.
Thank you, Ted.
I think also that part of it is just reminding ourselves that our voice matters. I think sometimes just kind of going to that, like that kind of soul piece where I think there is a time right now where we do feel very isolated, and that sometimes it can feel like shouting into the wind. But you'd be surprised who's listening. And then also, for me, I think modeling what it looks like to take risks in relationships with other communities, in coalition, what building looks like is also putting yourself out there, but also being willing to learn and modeling what it looks like to learn. I've been saying this too about kids and how kids learn from us. And it's not about us knowing everything, that sometimes if we don't know the answer, we can learn together with them. And what that can mean, as someone, for me, I think it's important to be not just lifelong learner, but also model what it looks like to make mistakes and properly apologize, to ask difficult questions, and to be willing to do that in a way that comes from wanting it to be better, from a place of love versus antagonism. So I think sometimes we have to practice it to be able to do it, and that's also part of civic engagement, in terms of changing the sentiments of our communities, but also making sure our community is educated about issues.
Thank you, Nancy. Yvonne, anything that you'd like to add?
Yeah, I think all of you hit the nail on the head. I think that I will just add, staying curious is definitely something that I've appreciated from colleagues and friends and allies, because when someone admits that they're not necessarily sure what the next steps are, I almost appreciate that more than them trying to dump a solution on me. So when folks are curious about what they can do and curious about what they can learn about, it sparks I guess an entryway for conversation, and it sparks, to me at least, it signals that they are interested in doing the work and they are interested in immersing themselves in solutions. And so staying curious is something that I would say that will come a long way for allies.
Thank you. So before we move on to our last question for our panelists today, I just want to send a quick reminder for those who are participating in this webinar. If you have questions that you would like to address to our panelists, please use the Q&A function to share your questions, and then we will share them with our panelists after this one. So the last question is, and perhaps you may have answered in different ways already. From your personal and professional experiences, if you have any advice that you would like to give to individuals who wish to leverage civic engagement to support the community, or perhaps there's anything else that you would like to share that have not been asked already from today's discussion.
Yeah, I wanted to share that, share yourself, share your talents, share your heart, share your passion, and share your head, right? Be strategic about things, and don't be afraid to speak out and to seek other like-minded individuals like yourself. Because if you care about something deep enough, you want to share that something deep within yourself. I know that right now it's terribly difficult and it's fearful for so many people. And as I've watched our Asian elders and other people have been hurt, I have myself have been, I never call myself a victim. I'm a subject of hate. And people always think, oh, it's happening in Garden Grove, it's happening in Santa Ana. I have to remind my colleagues, my professional friends that aren't necessarily, my cultural background, that I say to them, no, this happened and happens in Newport Beach, where my husband and I were waiting for a seat at an outdoor restaurant, an upscale restaurant, to be told to go back to China to go get a hot dog. And I said to myself, Mister, you picked on the wrong guy. So I said, I am an American just like you are, waiting at this upscale restaurant to sit outside to enjoy a dinner just like yourself. This is my home. I'm not going anywhere. It also happened down the street in my own pharmacy in Laguna Niguel, where I was told by a senior citizen who happens to be white that I'm the reason why our country is a shithole, because I'm draining the system. So we need to meet hatred and vile violence where it is, and to speak up for ourselves, speak up for our neighbors, and speak up for those that it impacts. Because we don't, it's too late, they get emboldened. And it's not just about my race or my ethnicity. Speak out for members of the Latinx community. Speak up for African Americans. Speak up for the disabled. Speak up for LGBTQ Americans, because we're all in it together. And as your president said, no more shall we hear those vile words, because I'm going to create a country where the younger generation and their kids will look in the back and say, what? W2F, this happened? I want to create that civil society where that's not tolerated, that respect, tolerance, and love is what we need. And I wanted to end my comments with a dedication to Thumb's mother, who is so courageous. What she did in raising not only awareness, but actually putting in her retirement money, where so many people are so afraid to do, that she decided to do a skywriting campaign before Huntington Beach and all that horrible hatred happened in Huntington Beach. This is what she did. This is what she did. 11,000 feet above the skies of Huntington Beach, she commissioned an airplane to write "No hate." No hate. And in a couple of weeks, please join us for a concert benefit that will provide necessary funds to nonprofits and to community-based organizations with the tools and the funding that they need to fight hate. That's April 24th. It's a Saturday from 5 to 8. It's a live global benefit concert. So when you ask what people can do, write to your legislators to support the AAPI hate legislation today, especially our two congresswomen that are Asian American. But you can also attend this, tweet it, Instagram it, TikTok it, and let people know that they can do something, contribute to this cause, because everything will go toward combating Asian hate. And I also wanted to leave with my tribute to another Titan, a student who's been a volunteer, Katie Cao, who speaks fluent Vietnamese and Spanish, has been helping us on this effort for this program called We Must Look Up, Rising Above Hate with Love. So I hope you join us. It's being live streamed on Facebook Live, YouTube, and across VietFace across the world. So thank you. So We Must Look Up is the title of an op-ed written by Nguyen, Thumb's mother, 76 years old, who was confronted by vile Asian hate. So this is her op-ed, and we decided to take the title of her op-ed and dedicate it to the special program, We Must Look Up, Rising Above Hate with Love. So thank you so much. Thank you so much to Thumb's mom, Nguyen, and thank you so much to Cal State Fulton family for having us host this important discussion, but more importantly, what we can do tangibly to stop Asian hate, and it's with love. So thank you.
Thank you, Ted, for that wonderful remarks that you've shared, and really appreciate all the work that you have done to support our community during this difficult time.
I'm also noticing a few of the questions that I think I will also reference about. I just saw one about fatigue, and just that this has been happening to us for a long time, but also the sentiments around Asian hate versus the BLM. I think one thing that's happening right now is an increased awareness across the board. I do feel that we have allies that we might not see. I think a lot of people are educating themselves and having these difficult conversations that we're encouraging people in our communities to have in their homes and in their communities. And so I don't think it is as separated as it sometimes feels. What I do think is a conversation worth having is just where we have similarities in terms of that feeling, that worry, that fear of what it means when we go outside, and the unpredictability of what we will face because of the systems we're in. And so I think that it doesn't have to be so hopeless. I think there's a lot of really great people who see that connection and want to educate in their communities, but also are in it with us. But it is true, this is a very long marathon we're all running, and change can be slow. I know for me, it's spaces like this that bring me a lot of hope. I know that there are times when I get tired and I really lean on other organizers, but that also I'm excited when every new generation of activists or students who are interested in learning about the work we do, you all will soon become our peers in the work and bring the innovation and the energy that some of us really need. And so you may feel like you don't know where to start or you're not ready yet. But I know we're all going to need you. And so take the time you need to learn what you need to learn. This fight's going to be here, right? And I think when you're ready to join us, I think we could definitely use the break. And so I think that there's just time. There's time, and we are in it together. And so I believe that, and that's how I think about work. I'm also going to share a resources list that we've created at Cause. It's just a starting point, things we've seen and heard from an event we did on Friday with Senator Padilla and Representative Liu. But it's just a place to begin looking for resources, know your rights, know what resources you have, and know what bills are out there and who's supporting them. I think that was an important note as well. So.
Thank you, Nancy.
I love that. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that, Nancy. I think you're absolutely right. And in a lot of the work I do, I think I like to remind people, especially in environmental advocacy, that you are part of this planet. So no matter how hard you're fighting for the planet, you also have to advocate for yourself, because it all starts within. And like I mentioned earlier, you know, if we're not entirely if it's not the best time for us to XY, like do something then that means something's off balance. And I think finding your balance and finding, really establishing like your core values, establishing what your boundaries are for certain things. You know, can you only have 3 conversations of this each week? It's something, right? But some people can do this all day long, right? So for me, I can talk about climate change all day long. For someone like Nancy, maybe once a week. I'm not sure, but you know, figure out what your boundaries are with this, because again, you're doing the inner work and finding the balance for that yourself. I found journaling with community. Maybe for you, it's yoga, it's movement, something like that. Because at the end of the day, what Nancy was saying is this fight it's long, and unfortunately, we have to admit that. But also, there are so many different lanes that we can show up for, similar to climate change, where you can show up for water, you can show up for plastic pollution. In this type of work, you can show up for older adults, you can show up for education, you can show up for accessibility, whatever that looks like and whatever resonates with you. Maybe start there. You don't have to be an expert in every single field, but start there and feel comfortable there. And once you're ready to kind of be a dual expert in 2 fields of, you know, social justice or environmental justice, then so be it. But I think it's, you know, definitely take the time for yourself, because if you burn out, then that's one less person showing up. And so I guess if you're not sure if journaling is something or writing is something that feels good to you, you can definitely lean on me, Climate Journal Project, theclimatejournalproject.com, or we're on Instagram as well. And I'm sure resources will be passed out after. So thank you.
Thank you, Yvonne, for sharing the wonderful resources. Saba?
Yeah, I wanted to say a couple things. I think what really rang true to me from what you said, Yvonne, is boundaries. I think, like, as I remember when I first graduated college, I was like, I'm going to change the world. And I know President Virgie told me that time and time again. And I was like, if he said it, that means I can do it. And I overexerted myself. I think I was involved with several different causes when Black Lives Matter started, going to all the protests, wanting to make sure that I was doing my part. And I quickly felt like I can't do this anymore. I'm stretching myself too thin because I hadn't established boundaries. So I think that's really important for us moving forward and seeing what is the best way for me to participate. We kind of talked about this earlier. I think Ted answered it, of how to get our Asian American congresswomen to support the legislation. I want to be as specific as possible, like making sure you call and making sure you talk to somebody in the office so that they write it down and they have to share your opinion with them is super important. So going to the effort right now, Googling them, finding that number, and if you're comfortable going to their office or writing to them, making sure that your voice is heard, because they are required to write down everything that you say if you live in their constituency. So I think that's really important, again. And if you want to do something that's less commitment, even tweeting at them and including their handle is great as well, because there's somebody from their office that's monitoring everything. And then the last thing is just the original question that you had, Natalie, of what advice do we have to people who want to leverage civic engagement to our community, is again listening, meeting us where we're at and being consistent. I think elected officials and often other community members come to our community, say they want to be here, they start an initiative and they're not consistent with it. They don't keep coming back and letting us know that they care about us, and it's kind of a one and done thing when things are happening. And I feel like for me, that's painful to see that you once said that you cared about us, you care about our community, but you're not being consistent. I feel like that's really important, and something to keep in mind.
Thank you so much. So we have a few more minutes, and at this time, I would like to take some questions from our audience, and we have quite a few. So I'm going to go ahead and read the 4 or 5 questions that we have, and feel free to address any of those questions as you see fit. So the first one is, how can we get our 2 Asian American women congresswomen to support the legislation against
I think that was
AI
answered
hate?
already.
Okay. And then the other question is, I'm wondering how you feel about the lack of community involvement. Other communities with the Asian hate versus Black Lives Matters, are we still invisible? And then I'm going to go ahead and share the remaining two questions as well. As we recognize that anti-APIDA violence is not a new phenomenon in America, how would you use civic engagement to combat fatigue that might develop in those who have been fighting the hate for perhaps decades? And then the final question is, what is a path to increase safety without leading to increased policing? And then we
I
do
think that's a
have
good question. Yeah, I think all of the other three questions were answered. I'm going to try to answer the last question, which I don't think was answered. And so what's the path to increase safety without leading to increased policing? I think there's going to be an element of policing. Maybe it needs to be perhaps oriented differently, as far as more emphasis on community-oriented policing, more bilingual resources, for the police officers, hiring more people of color to represent the policing department. I think there's always going to be a need for some level of policing, and that's going to be determined by the local level as far as your civic engagement and providing that input to the mayor, to the city council on that level, or to the county supervisors or the county sheriff's office, et cetera. There is more resources that ought to be devoted to community-oriented action, and that's with the nonprofits, and that's the community relations folks on the front lines. It's so many of the smaller organizations that work on a variety of different issues, whether it's hunger, food insecurity, healthcare, homelessness. There's a lot of those types of organizations that desperately need additional funding. And I know that in my work, with the coalition of different diversity leaders throughout Orange County, the Orange County Asian Pacific Islander Alliance group has advocated for, as part of legislation, both on the state level and at the federal level, hundreds of millions of dollars of additional funding to fund nonprofits and community-oriented, community-based organizations to provide the necessary resources for in-language information. But it's also going to take faith leaders and all people of faith to be able to unite and say enough is enough, and to provide the necessary resources and energy to be able to fulfill an elevated role so that we can reach toward the heavens together. It's also going to take private citizens and private community members to be able to contribute with these different fundraisers. You've seen a mammoth amount of fundraising that's been devoted to victims of that, but not a whole lot to community-based organizations. And that's the reason why we're taking the first step immediately to provide a path forward to other organizations, be it Black Lives Matter, Latinx community, of doing fundraising. And of course, everybody loves entertainers and everybody loves celebrities, right? We're in Southern California, but it's all throughout the world, so it's infectious. So leveraging their star power in order to create heart power, to power us and the movement forward for a more social, more just, and more importantly, a more safe society.
Thank you, Ted.
I think, and I love that, Ted. I feel like you covered so many things, and I just really appreciate. And I think to what Yvonne you were saying earlier, like I think some of what I could do is listen to all y'all all day. I mean, I think I really enjoy listening to people who are passionate about things, who inform themselves and want to inform others. And so I appreciate all of your work and being here with you. And for me, so much of it is just remembering there are a lot of solutions to these things, and that all of those solutions together have an impact. And so for me, just really thinking about all of the nonprofit organizations that have been filling the gaps, especially that are coming up because of COVID, it is important for our services to be funded and that it doesn't have to be either or. I think that is yet another tool of pitting us against one another, and that the importance is that we advocate for what we need and that we don't continue to like fall through the cracks because our size of our community is smaller. And so I'm just appreciative of everyone's efforts and that there can be a lot of different solutions. It doesn't have to be right or wrong. And how do we do that? How do we uplift each other and each other's solutions? And I think really explore what it looks like to not behave in a scarcity model. I think we need to figure out what we need first. And some of that means advocating for it. And then let's talk, and then let's negotiate. But it shouldn't be our community just has to wait. Like, why isn't our community important enough to be at the table where we can have those conversations and be part of that solution, and whatever that solution looks like. So I think for me, I'm just impressed with a lot of the work that came out of this past year. I'm impressed with a lot of people who have created a lot of amazing things, and that we just got to keep going. And it really is rejuvenating to hear what other people are doing.
Thank you, Nancy. Saba, Yvonne?
Thank you. Somebody asked about, like, are we still invisible? And I want to address that mostly because, again, you know, a lot of the work I do is regarding mental health, and you're never invisible. But, you know, you always, there will be moments where you will feel invisible or unheard. But so here's the way I look at it. If you're feeling invisible, somebody probably also is. And so what is causing, like, how did you kind of get there? And are there questions? So this question is really important because it's like, okay, we're asking each other, right? Like, are we going to continuously be invisible moving forward? But maybe we also build the courage to ask other communities that question. Like, hey, I noticed that you know, there was no language around this when this happened. Is it because it's not something that you resonate with? Is it because it's something that you don't have an experience with? Because I've been feeling a little bit left out, or I feel like we've been friends for 10 years and this incident happened on the news and you know, I didn't hear from you. So I guess stating the facts that you're like, hey, like, this is what happened. I'm just curious to see where your mindset is. Again, this kind of relates back to what I was saying. It's like staying curious instead of assuming that other people aren't on your side too, might be a really good approach for that. But no, none of this is invisible. And the reason why we got here in the first place is because we had that mindset of like, okay, well, this person's opinion doesn't count. And the minute that we change that within, we start acting like, okay, no, this doesn't deserve to be invisible. This deserves to be heard. And so I would suggest, you know, do the internal work and understand why you feel invisible, and then really communicate that. It's easier said than done. It's definitely challenging for me at times, especially when I lead a team, and I am Asian American and I lead a team, and you're always meant to be strong. But the week that everything was happening, you know, I wasn't, and I was vulnerable to that. And so let people know how you're feeling. But I guess what Nancy was saying is like, before you can ask for things, I guess maybe just do that work and understand, like, why is this important to you? Because people will show up for you. You just need to understand like why you need it first. And so that's kind of, I just want to remind you, you know, your feelings are completely valid. Create the space for it, create the room for it, and then create the support system for it. Because I think that that's really what upholds all of us in continuing the work that we do.
Thank you, Yvonne. And Saba, any last remarks?
I know we're at time, so I'll be quick. I didn't have anything else to add other than I wanted to thank all of the other panelists who showed up, and to Cal State Fullerton for making this space for us to have this conversation. I think so often we get wrapped up in our daily lives and we don't do the reflection. So this has been great.
Yeah, I wanted to give a quick shout out to Dr. Natalie Tran for an excellent moderation of this. She herself has been such an incredible example of generous community service through her Cards for Heroes program. providing these beautiful, heartfelt, personally written cards to our frontline workers during the height of the pandemic, when their lives were literally on the line so they can protect each and every one of us from coronavirus. Now we're confronting the virus of hatred. And so I wanted to give a shout out to Cal State Fullerton, for the president, for hosting this. And then also to Dr. Shah, who is such a powerful voice for the community, along with Bobby Porter and Katie Savant with Cal State Fullerton. So a huge shout out to the Cal State Fullerton team. There's so much love that I have for Cal State Fullerton. I should, go there after I retire from OCTA and get my doctorate work there to follow in Dr. Tran's example. So thank you, Cal State Fullerton. Here's a lot of love from all of us.
Thank you, Ted, and thank you to all of our panelists for sharing your stories, your insights, your advocacy coalition that you are building through communication, through self-care, and finding connections between you, yourself, as well as others, and showing up and standing up for ourselves as well as for others, and exercising, our rights to vote and to get a seat at the table, right? Thinking about access and advocate for the resources that we need in our community. So those are some of the themes that came up in our discussion today. But what I really admire all of you do so skillfully is that you do it with such empathy, with such compassion, with such care. And that is sort of like the spirit of our APIDA community, right? Our collectivism. Even when we are struggling, we still think about the well-being of others. And I think that is because, we recognize that our happiness and the well-being of ourselves is really dependent on the happiness and the well-being of others. So just really admire and thank you for all the work that you do to support our community. I want to thank everyone for joining today's Titan Table Talk on civic engagement in APIDA communities. Thank you, President Virgie and the First Lady Julie, for your support, as well as the team of the Office of Diversity, Inclusion, and Equity Programs for creating this wonderful space for us to engage in this critical dialogue. And special thanks again to our panelists for your insight, experience, and wisdom. And thank you to all of you who participated in today's webinar to learn more about APIDA communities and how to support our work. This recording can be viewed on the DIP YouTube channel with closing caption. So thank you once again and have a great afternoon.
All right, thank you. Thanks, everybody. Go Titans. Woo!
Thank you, everybody, for coming to our program today. Special thanks to our panelists, our moderators, and of course, our partners in alumni engagement and government external relations. Like Dr. Tran said, this conversation will be available in the DIEP YouTube channel with closed captioning. Please complete the feedback survey to help us keep these table talks relevant and impactful to our campus. Our conversation today really focused on allyship and advocacy. So I'd like to invite you all to our critical conversation centered on allyship and action this Friday at 10:30. The registration link is in the chat. And thank you, of course, to all our attendees today. It's been a pleasure to work with all our esteemed panelists and moderators this academic year to highlight these narratives in civic engagement. It has been definitely an honor to share space with everyone, and we look forward to continue this journey. So please keep a lookout for more information on the Titan Table Talk series for the next academic year. Thank you, take care, and have a good day, everyone.
So do we need to stay or can we leave?
No, you can go, Ted. Thank you so much for being here.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you so much. All right, bye-bye.
Take care.
And somebody's gonna